overview of very recent research in the field. Very interesting results. The first one is about the lessons learned from Aadhaar, while the second is about a field study from 3 African countries about the economic value to people using identity. Then in S3, we will hear about the experience of African countries with the use of identity and service delivery in sectors like social protection, financial inclusion, G2P, and health. We are going to look at it from the perspective of the users, not the identity authorities. In S4, we will move into other uses in 2 key notes on the US and European approaches to digital identity and its interoperable use. So we have a lot of ground to cover this afternoon, so let us get to it. In segment 1, which is now, I like to call to the stage Nidhi Parekh, who is the project director, Digital Identification and Finance Initiative in Africa, DigiFI, from JPAL. Nidhi, I understand, please join me. I understand you have distilled for our audience 7 lessons learned from Aadhaar. But before we discuss these 7 pillars of wisdom, I'd like to ask you to take a few moments and frame this research that led to your conclusions. Then I will ask you to join me for a fireside chat. It's already hot, so it could be a fireside, about these 7 lessons. So the podium is yours. You can advance the slides with the clicker.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please welcome Nidhi.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me clearly, and thank you so much for coming back from lunch for this session. So like Dr. Atick said, my name is Nidhi Parekh, and I'm the director of a research initiative, DigiFI, which stands for Digital Identification and Finance Initiative, and we are part of JPAL Africa, which is a research organization. It's lovely to have heard various inspirational and transformational stories from countries across the world today, and I am here representing more of a research perspective to talk about what research lessons can we bring to this group of people so together we can galvanize the transformational power of IDs. So with that, I'd like to first set the stage a little bit and tell you about JPAL and DigiFi. So what is JPAL and what is DigiFi and what do we really do? So in a sense, we are a global research organization based out of MIT with a presence very much in Africa and across the continent. Our main aim is to support governments and other implementers to inform policy with scientific evidence. And this is what the aim to do is to improve lives. And how we do this is we fund impact evaluation studies to this end. And we use the results from these studies to help governments design policies. DigiFi in particular focuses on digital IDs across sub-Saharan Africa, where unfortunately there is not a lot of evidence, and we're looking to fill this gap so we can put together best practices of what can be used on the continent. The work we do is built on the shoulders of giants, and so JPAL, JPAL affiliates and our founders, Abhijit Banerjee, Esther Duflo, and Michael Kremer, won the Nobel Prize for exactly this work of using impact evaluations to inform policy in 2019. And this is the work we're taking forward and taking into more depth today. So now that I've given you a little bit of overview of who we are, I want to get to the meat of why we are all here, which is the great digital ID debate. And so, as we all know, as different stakeholders in digital IDs, we have seen many, many headlines very similar to the ones here, which are for or against IDs. And to give you an example, the proponents of IDs talk about the transformational power of IDs in governance, fraud, black money, and leakages, and so on. While you have critics who talk about how rolling out IDs have led to loss of life and erosion of privacy. In this context, what is the role of impact evaluations, and what is the value add that we can provide to all of you sitting here? So what impact evaluations, which is the bread and butter of the work that we do, provides, is it helps governments, it helps civil society understand what is actually happening on the ground. So what is the data telling us from the ground? And how can we causally measure what the impact is of these reforms? So for example, if you want to say ID-enabled verification has saved X million dollars for the government, an impact evaluation will allow you to say that in a very clean and clear-cut way. A second reason for this is you want to understand what the big picture impact of these huge investments are. Governments, donors are pouring in so much money into digital IDs, and we need to know what the magnitudes of these effects are, who are the winners and losers, and how can we make these most cost-effective as well. And third, in a more nuanced way, understanding what design features will help us maximize the benefits of these huge investments and minimize the negative effects so that together we can move towards the power of transformational IDs. One second, sorry. Okay, so with that, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the 7 lessons, and I will go and stick with Dr. Atick. Thank you.
Thank you, Nidhi. In fact, it's always great to take a major program in hindsight and analyze and study and distill what came out into a set of lessons that we can use. So a lot of what you're going to hear is hindsight, meaning for the people who started with Aadhaar in the early days, some of this stuff, we did not have the vision to know that this is how you should do it. And that's the value of research, and that's the value of the work that they're doing, analysis that they're doing. So without any further delay, why don't we start with the first lesson? We're going to analyze lesson by lesson, and then maybe midway we can try to take some questions, and then at the end we'll definitely try to take some questions. So lesson number 1.
Great, sure. So lesson number 1. So the first lesson that has been distilled from the work in Aadhaar, as Dr. Atick said, was the need for policymakers to ask 3 questions to assess the need of linking IDs to various welfare programs. So the first question is, are there substantial issues on the ground that digital IDs are well suited to solve? And to give a little bit more detail to this, digital IDs in themselves are not a magic bullet, right? Mm-hmm. And so we need to understand what's actually happening on the ground and what problems could digital IDs solve. And so, for example, if there's an issue of ghost beneficiaries, where people actually don't exist, but they're people with these fake IDs that are collecting benefits, the Aadhaar card in that case has really helped in connecting, in building a database which is more complete and being able to remove ghost beneficiaries. And an alternate example to this, for example, if the problem on the ground is of quantity fraud. So there are people on the ground who are maybe siphoning some of the benefits, and Aadhaar verification might not necessarily help in that case, because you might still authenticate yourself, but the people on the ground might still siphon the money. Maybe Aadhaar will provide more negotiation power, but nothing beyond that. And then part B of the second question of this lesson is, what is the severity of the risk to the population being served? So we all know that there are trade-offs when it comes to rolling out digital IDs or any reform in that case. And so understanding what the severity of the risk is very important. The first thing, of course, we need to understand what the risks are, and usually the main risk is of exclusion and excluding vulnerable populations. And then as part of that, understanding, say for example, there's a program which is focused on providing food rations to poor households. Then how can, and then if these households cannot access their food rations because of Aadhaar, it's a matter of life or death. And this is a very severe risk. And in this case, you need to put in place very strong fallback mechanisms so that people are not left out of the safety net. Which brings me to the third question, which is, what are the mechanisms in place to mitigate these risks? Okay. And this means you need to have legal frameworks, and we've spoken a lot about this already, but you also need to make sure that these things are rolled out and they're accessible. And an example from India here is, there was a state in which one-time passwords or OTPs were used as a fallback mechanism, but actually a lot of Aadhaar cards were not linked to the right phone numbers. And so even though there was a fallback mechanism, in reality, people were not able to access or use that mechanism, which led to exclusion.
Okay, so this is a very important lesson. Before you jump into something, you gotta ask yourself, is it appropriate? What is the risk? And then how do you mitigate that risk? Sounds very reasonable, very sensible. But let me ask you, part A, when we are moving in a world where digital identity is going to be omnipresent, it looks outdated to me that you can't ask, do we need digital identity? Because digital identity is already here.
It's a really good point. I think digital identity, when you're linking to a program, I think at that point, it's still important to understand for what, or at least to be able to think through what problems it would be solving, so that your expectations are also set realistically. So I still think it is very important, and I think there is a role for digital ID for the sake of digital ID and its various.
So this is a functional digital ID, in your opinion?
It is a function, a use of a national or a foundational digital ID.
It's a use of a foundational like Aadhaar.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's legitimate, but I think over time, the first question A will start getting asked less.
I think that's probably already true.
Already true. Okay, let's move on. Lesson number 2.
So the second lesson, which in my opinion is the most important lesson,
Okay.
is what policymakers need to focus on is the consumers rather than savings, and savings will follow. And in the previous sessions, we spoke a lot about political priorities and how the tone at the top sets the tone for the rest of the government. And I think this very much speaks to that, because political priorities will affect design, will affect implementation, will affect everything. And to give you an example from the research in India, so there are 2 states which rolled out Aadhaar cards, and both the states saw changes in their program expenditure. One focused on consumers, one focused on savings. When we looked in more detail, we found that in the state that focused on consumers, the change in expenditure that happened was because the consumers were getting more of the benefits and leakages had reduced. In the state that focused on savings, the rollout happened a lot faster because they were very focused on getting savings. And while there was a reduction in total expenditure, it was partly because legitimate beneficiaries were being excluded from benefits. And because political IDs are so political, digital IDs are so political, thinking about how you bring people along is very important. And hence, this is one lesson that we drew.
I think this is a great lesson, but I also want to emphasize that it has become much more clear in hindsight, because I was involved with Aadhaar in 2008, 2009, 2010. Even before, it was even the PAN project. And at the time, the thinking was not, let us see how we focus on the consumer. The thinking was, we've got serious leakages, we've got serious problems. We need to make sure that the state benefit transfers, which at the time was like $50 billion, I think, a year, that was under control. But at what point in the Aadhaar evolution did we go from being fiscally motivated to being driven by this orientation? Do you think it's the civil society that pushed for that? How did we get there? Which is wonderful to be there, but we didn't stop there.
I think it's a really interesting question, and I think there are 2 parts to it. One is different states often had different political priorities within the grander Aadhaar system. And from what I know of the Aadhaar, even at least in terms of design, when it was, and you can tell me your opinion on this, but even when it was designed, the design was very simple. And I think that is one key element of being consumer friendly, which you'll hear from many private sector enterprises as well, that the simplicity of accessing Aadhaar and using it, or any such technology, is of paramount importance. So I think I think while the ultimate aim or the motivation might have been fiscal capacity and savings, many states, even from the beginning, did focus on consumer or beneficiaries as the starting point, at least. And I think that is important, because savings will follow, and they are crucial and important.
if you are an official trying to sell a program to senior management or senior leadership of a country, it is easier to tell them that this program, boss, is going to save us X amount of money than saying this program is going to put smiles on people's faces, because you can't measure smiles, you can measure savings. So how can we make this more concrete? Because this is the right approach, but it's hard to quantify.
I mean, I think in political terms, if you're thinking about beneficiaries getting more of their benefits, then and beneficiaries being happy in real terms, I do think that has political ramifications as well. So I think politically also this is an important thing to do. Understanding that savings often are the primary motivator, which is, I mean, fair in many governments. But I think there is a huge political base for focusing on consumers and focusing on citizens and your vote bank.
You mean it could help in the elections?
Exactly.
And so basically you are talking about a rights-based approach, and that could help people realize that the government or whoever is implementing the program is focusing on the right. I buy it, fair enough. Let's go to lesson 3.
Building fallback options is the third lesson, and I've spoken about this a little bit already. But what they found in India was it's very important, especially initially as you're rolling out the program, to have fallback options in case there's certain failures in the technology. And so thinking about offline authentication, for example, you have local authorities who can sometimes step in, and then also thinking deeply in terms of design. What is the frequency of authentication through Aadhaar or any digital ID? And what is the burden of deletion of someone from a roster because they don't have an Aadhaar card or a digital ID card? So I think thinking about these and building fallback options upfront is really important.
So this is what we would traditionally call exception handling.
Yes.
Okay. So, and it also means that we have to emphasize the human in the loop. And not replace it by bots, AI bots that are going to decide and therefore frustrate people. So any program you build, we need a human in the loop.
Absolutely.
Okay, I sign up for that. Lesson number 4.
So lesson number 4, which I think is an easy sell to you, is about investing in building trust between government and civil society.
Absolutely.
And we have heard this as well in the previous sessions about how it's so important to have buy-in to the system for it to succeed. And what often happens is because policymakers are managing very real and difficult trade-offs, so you have some certain sections of society who are focusing on certain aspects which might be negative of the ID, and governments either think they are motivated if they don't see the whole picture, and they can alienate them as well. So this is calling for a balance from both civil society and government in working together. And it all sounds nice, but to think about concrete ways to do this is one, thinking about if there are issues, even if there are teething issues, acknowledging them, publicly working towards making them better. And a second big one, especially from our perspective, is collecting data and reporting it in a transparent manner so people can see the same picture and look at the same data, and hopefully that brings people together.
I'm sure you would agree with me that trust is earned.
Yes.
And so we have to earn the trust of the people.
Yeah.
Rule of law, regulations, and laws that protect
Absolutely.
people, like data protection. Let me ask you, you would imagine that Aadhaar has earned the trust of people, yet data protection law has not yet passed in India.
Yeah.
So how did the government earn the trust?
It's an excellent question. I think, and this is not based on research, but more of my opinion, I think there are two things that are very important. One is narratives, and I think we talk about narratives based on data and reporting. And so I think that the narrative that you spin, and coming back to the previous point on benefits being seen by consumers and beneficiaries as well. So you want to weave a narrative which upfront makes people feel involved and trust the system. And second, you want to show results in some way. And whether it's people's personal experiences with use cases and whatnot, I think these aspects have been important in India.
Can you buy trust?
It's a philosophical question.
Let's ask ChatGPT. My point is, at the end of the day, if the beneficiaries were getting benefits in their pocket, perhaps they are positively inclined. It's not that they trust, but they see the outcome.
Yeah, I think so. I think you have to see the outcome, and I mean, digital IDs are very political, and you're using political capital in them as well. So I think to some extent, it's a country-by-country choice that needs to be made. But speaking more holistically, I think it is about seeing the benefits finally for the consumers.
It's basically what is in it for me.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I trust you if my interests are on your agenda. Okay, I buy that. Let's go lesson 5.
Sure. So lesson 5 is about the need to adapt. So we need to build in measures which can evaluate beneficiary experiences in real time and adapt to these findings. And this is a call for when you're rolling out a program to, in real time, have, like in India, they had call centers where they would call beneficiaries on a daily, weekly basis to understand what was happening on the ground. And they, in real time, would adapt to whatever they could from these calls. And there are various ways to do this. We have monitoring systems, administrative data, looking at all forms of data, and having your ground to your ear to the ground in general.
So, I mean, this is the continuous business process improvement, a very logical thing. You've seen it in Aadhaar. I buy that. Lesson 6.
So lesson 6 is to be able to differentiate between teething problems and design flaws. So whenever you roll out a new reform, you're going to have some teething problems for sure. And so understanding what these problems are and responding to them is important, but not extrapolating from them whether they're design flaws or whether the system itself is not working. And so, for example, with digital IDs, when you're rolling out, you're bound to have initially some teething problems in terms of technological glitches. And so working on those is important, but not magnifying those to the extent that they become the only thing you focus on is something we've learned from the Aadhaar experience.
In business system evaluation, it's quite difficult sometimes to differentiate between a design flaw and also admit that it's a design flaw. Sometimes we persist in trying to make things happen. This morning I said, Huduma number did not work, and it's a good thing that the country took an exit from there fast enough. In other contexts, you could have just persisted.
I agree, but I think exactly, it's like thinking about what are teething problems and what could be design flaws. And I'm not an expert on Huduma number, but it seems like the problems were beyond teething problems there, absolutely. Right. But I think, and it's equal, as I said, what I said was it's important to recognize teething problems. I completely agree. It's equally important to recognize design flaws as early as possible.
But it's also important to listen to the people, because the people will actually, by adoption or rejection, will make you aware whether you've got a design flaw or not.
Absolutely, with digital IDs especially.
Great. Give us the last lesson.
So the last one is the need to speak a common language, and for this, the need to match survey and administrative data to differentiate between exclusion and leakages, and for political economy reasons. Now this is quite a mouthful and slightly technical, so let me explain it in more detail. So you can have a change or a reduction in program expenditure overall, and you can see this from administrative data. But whether this is caused because of a reduction in leakages or because you're excluding legitimate beneficiaries, you will not know for administrative data. So what you need to do is you need to match administrative data with survey data to understand exactly, like you said, what's actually happening on the ground. Excellent. And this is also really important for political economy reasons. And to give you an example of this, so there was a state in India where they rolled out Aadhaar, and they saw a reduction in admin data for program expenditure. And what was happening was there a reduction in leakages on the ground. But the people on the ground were not happy with this because they had vested interest. And so the message that went to the top was that Aadhaar was not working on the ground. And it's not until they saw research and the data which matched survey and admin data, they found that leakages were reducing, but beneficiaries were actually happier with this system, which is why this is really important.
Good. In the interest of time, I'd like to ask one question in English, please. If anybody can ask a question, we want to take it now. Pam.
Thank you so much. I like your 7 lessons. Question for you. So I was on the ground. I did a lot of research on Aadhaar as it was being built. And one of the things that I saw at that time was a real issue in regards to building a digital stack with services, where the services became increasingly mandatory. And this also I would raise to you and ask you what you think of this as a potential 8th lesson learned.
Just to make sure I understood the question, and thank you for that, is the increasing mandatory nature of Aadhaar and what my opinion is on that?
No, not now. Back before the 2018 Supreme Court decision, it was out of control, absolutely. I mean, to move a chair, you had to have an Aadhaar and give your Aadhaar. Now, it's no longer mandatory for every little thing. It's only mandatory for tax purposes. It's a very fair system now, whereas there are also a lot of services built on it, which people voluntarily want. But what I'm saying is that I think one of the lessons, especially from early Aadhaar, is the issue of what's voluntary, what's mandatory. Thank you.
Thank you.
I mean, I think it's very important when you put a program together that you create some sort of safeguards and rails that prevent this creep. All of a sudden, what you intended it to be, it becomes much broader. So perhaps a lesson learned from India is that the Supreme Court had to step in and slap back.
And I think that's where civil society plays a huge role.
Exactly.
And absolutely crucial in the Indian context, and hats off to them for it. But I think...
In fact, I was surprised not to see a lesson about the need to bring in civil society actors from the beginning.
I think, I think that's a very good point, and I think because of the nature of the research we couldn't do that. But I think the point of building trust, in a way, does encapsulate that as well.
Okay. We have a couple of very interesting announcements from JPAL, so we want to take them in the interest of time.
Sure.
I understand that JPAL is working in Africa. Can you quickly tell us which countries are you working in, without details, please?
Okay, absolutely. So, I mean, I've spoken a lot about Aadhaar in India, but we are actually based in Africa, and we want to create research from Africa, for Africa, across the various contexts on the continent. And so we're working with various government partners and private sector partners on the continent to help them and support them better design their digital ID projects. And so, for example, we're working in Liberia with the Ministry of Gender and Social Protection and Women to understand different registration strategies for digital IDs in urban areas. And we've recently also working with the Ugandan government, NIRA, the ID Registration Authority there, to understand how to increase take-up and increase birth registration as well for the IDs.
Excellent. I am led to believe that JPAL has funding opportunities to fund research in Africa. Could you show us what kind of funding opportunities? Can you put up the slide which shows the funding opportunities? Yes, that's the one.
And so, like I said, we are really here to support governments and support private sector in their quests to understand how to implement digital IDs better. So we bring a network of researchers with us, as well as funding, to be able to understand what is happening on the ground better. And I won't go into detail of the different funding opportunities, but I'll focus on our bread and butter, which is funding full randomized evaluations. And we provide up to $400,000 a project to work on these projects together with governments and researchers.
If people here in this room would like to apply, how would they do that?
I would say reach out to us as a starting point.
You're here.
Yeah, we are here. This is our email address. Reach out to us. We would love to talk to you and understand in more depth what you're looking for, how we can support you. And together we'll build a project and we'll bring in our researchers and hopefully work together towards an effective digital ID.
Exactly. Let me point out, I'm sure many of you have a lot of questions, but we've established an augmented channel, so livecast@ID4Africa.com. Send in your questions, and June 7 or June 21st, depending on how we organize the episodes, we will address your questions. We may even bring in the speakers that with your demand, if you feel you would like to ask more specific questions. So please do not be shy to ask through the livecast channel. We can take one more physical question, but it has to fit within 2 minutes because we start on time, we stay on time, we end on time. So one more question for Nidhi before I thank her and move on to the next segment. Time does fly. Yes.
Hi, good afternoon. It's not a question, just a suggestion.
Yes, please.
Nidhi, for your record, I am Sanjeev Yadav from UIDI.
From UID Authority of India.
Yeah.
You should be here, but he will be sitting here tomorrow.
Yeah, so like you mentioned about your lesson learned one, firstly, no one is put out of the system because they don't have Aadhaar. It is guaranteed by Aadhaar law, even if you don't have Aadhaar, no benefit will ever be denied to a citizen, number one. And there are exceptional handling mechanism in case you have Aadhaar, you are not able to authenticate yourself, or even if you don't have Aadhaar, still benefit will be given to you, okay? Now, speaking about your last point about inclusion of society. So I would like to place on record here that with times, since Aadhaar was first conceptualized and matured, Indian government, whenever it make any laws, that is put on open domain for public consultation for full about a month plus. And once consultations are received, these consultations are again put on public domain for counter comments. So there is definitely inclusion of society for any law which is made in India. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjeev, for this added information, if you want to react.
No, thank you so much for that. And I will say for all these lessons, I think these are lessons from what has happened well and not well in India. And so don't take any of these as lessons for India that we're trying to bring out. This is from what the researchers have learned at their time in India over a decade doing research there. So thank you very much for that.
Okay. Nidhi, thank you so much for this wonderful insights. I thank the researchers who've done this work. We look forward to bringing you back in the live casts or in the future to continue to inform our knowledge about this topic. Thank you.
So much.
Now we're ready to take on segment number 2 in the PS2 session this afternoon, and it will be by Yiannis Theodorou, who is the head of digital ID from the Tony Blair Institute. He will present on the economic value of digital ID in Africa, a multi-country field study. I want to say that this will be a 20-minute spotlight presentation with a virtual Q&A. You see that symbol on this? It is time that we integrate the virtual with the physical, which means the questions are not asked physically today, but are asked virtually to livecasts at ID4AFRICA.com, and we will answer them during the June 7th livecast. So without any further delay, Yiannis, thank you for being with us. The stage is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. I think, firstly, just a segue from the previous session, Dr. Atick, you said something really spot on, which is it's very difficult to measure the value of people's smiles.
Exactly.
And that's exactly what we've been trying to do with this research, measure the smile that a digital ID can do. So by way of a quick introduction, I'm Yiannis Theodorou, Global Lead for Digital ID at the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. There it is. So we work with political leaders around the world, including many governments represented here today, to drive change. And we offer advice on strategy, policy, and delivery, and seek to unlock the power of technology across all three as much as possible. And we share what we learn on the ground so everyone can benefit. Now, before I share the results of the preliminary results of the research we conducted, I want to share a few pieces of context. I'm sure everyone today sort of agrees with these statements, and indeed, digital ID has risen on the manifestos of several governments and on the priority objective list over the recent years. And we see three key factors driving this momentum. The first one is, of course, the COVID experience. With the initial lockdown measures and then the social distancing restrictions, COVID has demonstrated how important it is to be able to do things remotely and online. Massive transformation efforts have been taking place across the world, with many traditional face-to-face processes having to be reimagined during and post-COVID. The bottom line is that COVID has significantly accelerated the momentum towards more inclusive and robust digital ID systems. The second driver, as Dr. Atick mentioned earlier, has been the rapid penetration of mobile. According to the GSMA, smartphones make up 61% of all internet connections in sub-Saharan Africa by the year 2025. Furthermore, 40% of the adult population in the region are now connected to mobile internet services. However, however, another 44% live in areas covered by mobile broadband networks but do not yet use mobile internet services. This is commonly referred to as the mobile usage gap. And it tells us two things. Firstly, the potential for leveraging mobile to reinvent traditional approaches to digital ID cannot be disputed. And this opens the door to millions of people being able to access public and private services remotely. But the second point is that we are not there yet. So for many countries in Africa, any mobile-driven approaches would still need to be complemented in the short term by more traditional credentials, including smart cards or QR codes, which could be electronically verified by service providers equipped with smartphones or other readers. The third driver is proven results. There are numerous studies out there that illustrate the macro-level value of digital IDs and their role in promoting inclusiveness and improving public service delivery, achieving massive efficiencies and enhancing people's lives. We know that to realize the full potential value of a digital ID, governments need to unlock multiple high-value use cases that also sustain high levels of usage. When it comes to enrolling populations into a digital ID system for the first time, an individual needs to understand the specific value to them and how their own lives could benefit, especially those who are more likely to be left behind or be late adopters. But what is this value? So we have found a lack of data quantifying the economic benefits of the individual level across demographic and income groups. Understanding which digital ID-enabled use cases can deliver maximum economic impact is crucial for two key reasons. Firstly, governments need to know which use cases to prioritize as they build digital ID systems in order to maximize their potential for individuals and society. Communicating this value to the individuals concerned during the enrollment process can increase adoption and usage of digital ID, particularly among late adopters and those at risk of being excluded from the opportunities that a digital ID system can afford. And this is why we recently commissioned a qualitative study in 3 countries, Rwanda, South Africa, and Cote d'Ivoire. We focused on 4 marginalized groups: rural females, informal retailers, the elderly, and the urban unemployed. We're still analyzing the data and will be publishing more in-depth insights later in the summer, but today I will present some of the preliminary findings, which we're also releasing tomorrow in a blog. Our objective was to identify a few use cases and explore the economic impact on people's lives if they were to leverage a digital ID. We also wanted to offer policymakers a glimpse of how different use cases could create varying levels of value across marginalized populations. In each country, we looked at a selection of use cases that were chosen based on desk research, and mostly use cases where people do not currently use digital IDs to access, but rather have to go somewhere in person and use manual ID processes. In order to calculate the potential benefits individuals could derive in each use cases, we sought to understand the costs that they're having to incur. For example, travel costs or sundry costs like having to pay for photocopies or having the documents verified. But also opportunity costs. For example, the hours spent away from their home or their workplace multiplied by their foregone hourly or daily wages. So, in Rwanda, we'll start with 4 preliminary findings. So this is just Rwanda. Here we look at, if we look at the potential economic benefit that each marginalized group could derive from a digital ID across all the use cases we examined, we find that the elderly stand to gain the most, both in absolute terms and relative terms, followed by the informal retailers. The profile of most marginalized groups across the respondents suggested limited smartphone ownership, only 5% own a smartphone, and a lack of digital skills. The overwhelming majority said they would need assistance if they were to use a smartphone or go to a website. Interestingly, most of the marginalized individuals we spoke to said they felt more comfortable relying on an in-person registration processes, for example, an IREMBO agent, or going to a local branch office, despite an extra fee attached to this. In addition to a gap in digital skills, we also found there is scope to build a digital ID verification platform which would eventually enable individuals to verify their identity remotely, for example, by having their smart card ID scanned and read electronically. This next slide looks at the 4 individual use cases we examined in Rwanda and shows that the most promising use case in terms of value for marginalized populations could be the remote registration of medical insurance, as well as being able to receive social grant payments remotely. The first, medical insurance, could save the equivalent of 2.2% of monthly income, while receiving social grants remotely could save 1.6% of monthly income on average. Now, if we were to use these average figures to make a national estimation across the 4 use cases we examined, unlocking the full potential of Rwanda's digital ID system could lead to savings of 9.7 million per annum among these marginalized populations alone, so excluding any savings the government could achieve. Of these 9.7 million USD, the remote payment of social grants and the remote registration of medical insurance will be responsible for the 43% and 38% of these total savings remotely, respectively. The eligibility for the remote registration for medical insurance drives the impact of this use case, as it's available to more than 90% of the population. Again, if we were to aggregate the absolute figures at the national level, taking into account the size of each target group, the rural females and the elderly stand to benefit similarly from leveraging a digital ID across the selected use cases, saving 4.8 million and 4.3 million, respectively. Remote payment of social grants, shown by the purple bars, would be a major contributor of economic value for the elderly, accounting for 63% of all savings by that group. This is because for every 1 rural woman, there are 3.5 elderly people who are eligible to receive a social grant. Enabling remote registration for medical insurance, illustrated by the yellow bar, shows a significant economic gain for rural women as a group, accounting for 43% of the potential savings across use cases for this group. This is because almost 5 times more women compared to the elderly are likely to benefit from the remote registration of medical insurance. And now moving on to South Africa. Again, 4 preliminary findings there. So both in absolute and relative terms, the average elderly person, again, stands to gain from better leveraging a digital ID across our selected use cases in South Africa, followed by rural women. In South Africa, the most promising digital ID use cases for marginalized populations are the remote payment of social grants, followed by the remote registration of social grants. So for remote payments, individuals would save on average about 6% of their monthly income, equivalent to about $81 with a frequency of once a month, while remote registration would save about 2.4% of the monthly income, or about 44 USDs, with a frequency of once per year. If we were to use these figures to make a national estimation across all 4 of the use cases we examined, again, unlocking the full potential of South Africa's digital ID system could lead to savings of $620 million per annum among these 4 marginalized populations alone, of which the remote payment of social grants and the remote registration for social grants would account for 70% and 21% of those total savings, respectively. Looking at the aggregate potential impact value of a digital ID on each marginalized group in South Africa, you can see the following. So rural women would benefit the most as a group. As the purple bars show, the remote payment for social grants could be the most impactful use case, accounting for 70% of the potential savings among rural women. Interestingly, while at the individual level, an informal retailer stands to save more than the average rural woman every year, as a group, the aggregate savings among informal retailers are negligible. In other words, due to the differences in the group size and eligibility, they account for less than 10%. What this means is that while the informal retailers may be very small in comparison with a small impact at national level, the individuals within that group would significantly benefit from using a digital ID. And this is an example where a government's social protection policy can play a crucial role in how to balance the support provided to smaller marginalized groups, such as the informal retailers. Moving on to Cote d'Ivoire, when looking at the potential economic benefit that each marginalized group could derive across all the use cases, we find that an urban unemployed person stands to save the most from a well-functioning digital ID system with a 17% monthly saving, followed by informal retailers at 13%. And looking at the digital ID use cases with the highest potential economic value for marginalized populations, it's a close contest between the remote registration for education, but also the remote birth registration, with an equivalent saving of 6% of monthly income, or around 33 USD. Again, if we were to use these savings at the national, to conduct a national estimation across the use cases, unlocking the full potential of digital ID in Cote d'Ivoire could lead to savings of 43.7 million per annum among these 4 target populations. And 70% of these savings could be achieved by those who could benefit from the remote registration for education, the purple pie, while 20% of the potential savings could be derived by those benefiting from remote birth registration, the blue piece of the pie. Finally, comparing the estimated aggregate impact of digital ID across the use cases and across each marginalized group, we see that the urban unemployed would benefit the most as a group, followed by rural women. Enabling remote birth registration, the blue color, could be the most significant contributor for this differential impact across the urban unemployed. However, the most important impactful use case could be the remote registration for education, which could save the largest aggregate amount for both rural women and the urban unemployed. Now, we'll have more insights and analysis when we publish the findings later in the summer, but I'd like to conclude with some overarching policy recommendations that were identified through the interviews we conducted. So firstly, as Dr. Atick mentioned earlier, the need to establish a robust PKI could not be underestimated if the full potential of a digital ID system is to be realized. Our research showed that in Rwanda and Cote d'Ivoire in particular, there are many use cases where the existing digital smart card ID is primarily used as an analog card. So there is a lot of scope to support electronic authentication of digital IDs via robust PKI, which makes a digital ID system secure, scalable, and reliable. Public and private sector services can leverage a country's PKI to authenticate people's digital IDs. The second recommendation is that governments may not need to reinvent the wheel and start from scratch. particularly if they can use existing platforms to manage identification, registration, and service delivery. By training and incentivize agents or civil servants, governments can optimize the implementation and boost the adoption and trust in digital ID systems. In Rwanda, for example, the Irembo platform acts as a single point of entry for individuals to access multiple services, but there is scope to add things like transparency and consent mechanisms to offer greater control for individuals over what data they share and how it's used. Third recommendation is to consider the needs of all population groups when designing digital ID systems to ensure inclusivity. For example, in order to accommodate various access channels, for example, mobile devices, local kiosks, or agents equipped with smartphones and biometric devices. We spoke to some individuals who highlighted that to enroll for digital ID, they had to travel to the place of birth to obtain a birth certificate and certify it before using it for their digital ID applications. They further faced significant delays in receiving their IDs, resulting in significantly slow adoption. Respondents in South Africa praised the country's ecosystem when onboarding to financial services, noting they could enroll in kiosks within supermarkets. This level of accessibility allowed individuals early and easy access to services, saving both time and effort and money. By integrating or harmonizing siloed registries across departments, governments can achieve more effective digital ID systems, can promote interoperability, cut duplication of records, and costs for both government bodies and individuals concerned. Choosing the right use case for your country to fast-track user demand and adoption is essential as well. As our study showed, each use case will have a different economic impact on the lives of people depending on demographic, cultural, and social factors. Now, even though our study focused on the economic benefits of the target population, we recognize that when assessing which use case to prioritize, governments should also factor in the direct and indirect costs and benefits, including the cost of enrollment and implementation of each use case, and the potential efficiency savings from streamlining traditional paper-based processes. And last but not least, a digital ID system ecosystem thrives when people can connect to services online. The need to expand internet coverage, fixed, mobile, or satellite, should not be understated. Where there are market failures, governments can consider creating the right incentives for the private sector to invest and connect the last mile. At the same time, to accelerate demand and adoption, boosting consumer readiness is also key, by promoting access to smartphones, helping people to develop digital skills, and communicating the economic value of having a digital ID to those marginalized groups that are harder to reach. This brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much, Dr. Atick, and look forward to answering questions.
In fact, we need more research and studies of this form so that policy can be backed by evidence and by data. What I found fascinating about this is that the economic value to even the same groups of people in different countries was actually different. When you look at South Africa versus Cote d'Ivoire versus Rwanda, so it's very important that we have the methodology so that in the country that you're trying to make policy decisions, you can develop a sense of what priorities should be. But thank you so much. We look forward to the publication in detail, and thank you for your contribution. Okay, this now ends segment number 2 in this afternoon's plenary session. We are now going to be moving to segment number 3, which is in a way a continuation of this, and it is all about understanding service delivery from the perspective of those who are delivering the service. So digital identity for service delivery, and here we're talking about some sort of a twinning, some sort of interoperability between the identity authorities and between the various sectors who are in the service delivery. I will start by asking Tanzania, who is going to talk to us how they used digital identity for social protection purposes. So I'll call to the stage Ismail Hassan Rumatila, Director General of the National Identification Authority, NIDA, Tanzania. And Josephine Temba, she's from the e-payment coordinator, Tanzania Social Action Fund, TASAF. Actually, I understand you are going to share the presentation, so I don't know, you're welcome to sit and welcome to stay at the podium, however you want it. But please, 15 minutes, because I would like to allow 5 minutes specific to Tanzania from the audience. And the audience, please sharpen your questions so that they are very, very swift. Okay? So, please, the stage is yours.
Thank you.
Operator, give us a counter.
Thank you, Dr. Atick. Distinguished participants, good afternoon. My name is Ismail Hassan Rumatila. I'm the head of the National Identification Authority in Tanzania. And together with me is Ms. Josephine Temba. She's from the TASAF, Tanzania Action for Social Fund, Social Security Fund. So today we are going to share our experience on how the digital identity systems has helped social protection and the financial inclusion in Tanzania. I will give a very short brief of the National Identification Authority in Tanzania. So I'll give the introduction, then the coverage, how far have we covered the nation, the registration perspective. We'll talk about the role of digital ID systems in financial inclusion and the social protection. The factors for achievements, how did we achieve those success, and then we'll talk about the way forwards and the key strategies. And then Josephine will give a brief on how she, with the TASAF, are beneficiaries of the national ID system. And then she will conclude. The National Identification Authority, NIDA, was established under Section 2.1 of the National Identification Authority Establishment Instrument in 2008, and is guided with several registration and in the Identification of Persons Act of 1986. It's a very, very long way. And the task we were given is to register all the people living in Tanzania from 18 years and above, including citizens, legal residents, and refugees. And now we have included the stateless people or persons. Also to build a database of all registered persons and share data with stakeholders and beneficiaries, and to produce and issue ID cards to all registered persons. So far, the coverage, our database, we have 23.8 million persons, including Tanzanians, legal residents, and refugees. As you can see the number there. And these data are by April 2023. We have also provided national ID numbers, NIN, to 20.07 persons, including Tanzanians, legal residents, and refugees. And we have interfaced with stakeholders, 74 of them. being government institutions and the private institutions. The role of need system in financial inclusion. The national ID allows individuals, especially those in remote areas or with limited mobility, to open bank accounts very quickly and efficiently without the need for extensive documentation or writing periods. A reliable identity is integral to providing and obtaining financial services because it is needed in various stages in an individual's interaction with the formal financial sectors. During account opening, a customer needs identity credentials so that the financial service provider can match that information against the other sources. So we have private banks. We have private banks and microfinances in the area of know your customer in order to identify the people who are getting financial services. And more than 55 financial institutions are now integrated with the lead system. We also have advantage of enabling biometric authentication of financial transactions, enables more than 16 million people to access financial services up to now. And that is by April 2023. Roles of need system in social, sorry. Go back. Want to go back? The next step is the roles of need system in social protection. As you all know, the majority of the mass people in Tanzania are living in the rural areas, and most of them, they have been lacking the proper or reliable identity before NIDA was established. So up to now, I have to go fast. We have I can't see there. We have been targeting social protection programs to the most vulnerable and the marginalized members of the society by verifying the identity of beneficiaries, which ensures that benefits are going to the right people and prevent fraudsters. So far, we have integrated the TASAF, as I have told you. We have the National Social Security Fund, the NSSF. We have the Public Social Security Fund, which is PSSF. We have the National Health Insurance, and we have the Higher Education Students Loans Board, which is giving loans to the higher students. And you can see the numbers so far of the people who have been beneficiaries of those social protection programs. So how did we achieve all that? How did we go to that to access? The first one is the government commitment. Our Tanzanian government, through the President, Madam Samia Suluhu Hassan, they have invested in the necessary technology and the infrastructure. There is also a very big political will. And that's why today we have been joined by the Minister for Interior from Tanzania, Mr. Hamad Masauni. Can you say hello to the audience? Yeah. We have also the chairman of the Permanent Parliamentary Committee of External Affairs, Defense and Security, Honorable Vita Kawawa. Can you? And we also have the Permanent Secretary from the Minister of Interior, Mr. Caspar Muya. And we have also the Director for TASAF. Anywhere you are, you can raise, yeah, thank you so much. So that shows how the government commitment is. We are moving forward. But also the government has made a concerted effort to ensure that marginalized population, such as rural or low-income communities, are able to participate in the program. And the National ID has promoted financial inclusion by providing a reliable form of identification for individuals, enabling access to financial services. We are also trying to, improve our legal frameworks. As I've told you in the beginning, that our legislation was from 1986. So we have to change since the world is going very fast, it's changing, and we are also moving. So there are so many legislations which are supporting us, and they are making it mandatory for the people to use the national IDs for various programs. This includes the SIM card biometric registration regulations. You must use the biometrics to register for SIM cards, and the Anti-Money Laundering Act, which make it mandatory for the banks and the financial institutions to use the NID system in verification. Also, there are various frameworks of financial inclusion. So these all have, we also have the open standard system, which allows integration of the other stakeholders. Our way forward is, the first one is to strengthen the data security. We are going to invest in robust security measures. We are also going to expand coverage and reach out to marginalized communities that may face barriers to registration. We are also continuing innovation, integration with other government services, collaboration with private sectors, and we are also going to start registration of the minors, the people who are under 18 years of age. Then strengthening data privacy and the protection. And this year we have passed, as the government, we have passed the Private Data Privacy Act 2022. So that is the So I've been told that we are running out of time. I take this opportunity to welcome Madam Josephine so that she can tell us how the TASAF has benefited from the NID system in our country. Welcome.
So Tanzania forfeits the Q&A, and instead we will hear from TASAF. Thank you, Digi. I'll give you this, please. Have a seat.
Good afternoon. I'm Josephine from TASAF. And TASAF is the government institution established in year 2000 as one of the government initiatives towards poverty reduction. We are currently implementing one of the largest productive social safety net program with around 1.3 million poor households who are our beneficiaries, and where 52% of the households are being represented by women, And from those households, we have around 5.2 million beneficiaries. Through the program, we are providing the productive household support to beneficiaries' households with an integrated package of benefits and services, including cash transfer with health, education, and people with disability benefits. We also do public works, where the households work in the community needs-driven projects, where they earn income, but skills as well. And also we have livelihood support, where this facilitates more on the saving groups and the provision of productive grants. All these services are based in cash transfers, which we are currently in the rolling out of electronic payments, where these beneficiaries are receiving these benefits through mobile money wallets or bank accounts, which all these needs national ID to open the account and the mobile wallet. And so far, we have been working with NIDA to conduct special exercise to register these beneficiaries so that they get the national ID, so that they will be able to open the bank accounts and the mobile wallets. So we have already registered around 680,000 beneficiaries, and they have been issued NIN. And so far, we have around 447,000 beneficiaries that has been enrolled to e-payment. You can see there we have OTC. This is over the counter. Before we roll out e-payment, we did the pilot, and we learned that only 55% would manage to have the mobile wallet or bank account due to the nature of the geographic of Tanzania. So there's area where we could not find a bank agent, but also because we are dealing with the poor households, not all could accommodate, having a mobile phone. So we introduced over the counter. This is a mobile application where it requires national ID and the beneficiary's fingerprint. So how it goes, the mobile app is installed at the payment agent smart gadget, where the beneficiaries goes to the agent during the payment sessions, which are being done bi-monthly, so 6 times a year. So when they go to the pre-identified agent, the agent captures the national ID number into the mobile app, and they scan the fingerprint, either using a scanner or a mobile phone camera. So once the fingerprint has been scanned, the information is being sent to the TASAF database. Our electronic payments are done through the government e-payment gateway. So there is where we push our payment batches, our payment database. So the fingerprint and NIN are sent to the TASAF database at the GPG. And to confirm if the NIN entered, the agent is the one already captured in the database, because we pre-capture these numbers to our database. So we confirm if the number entered is for the beneficiary. And then, once confirmed, the NIN and the fingerprint are sent to the NIDA database for the authentication. If the authentication passes, then the information is sent to the payment service provider of the respective agent. Okay, so because we send the whole information of the name of the beneficiary, the amount that they're supposed to receive, so the payment service provider credits the amount to the agent. We call them wakalas. So once they deposit the amount, the exact amount that was in the database, then the wakala issues the cash to the beneficiary. So this is the over-the-counter payment solution, and we had this to accommodate those beneficiaries who could not manage to have bank account or mobile wallets. Of course, the challenge for the solution so far is on the network connection because, again, we need at least 2G internet connection to send the information to NIDA for authentication. That is quite a major problem, but again, we are working with the NIDA on the offline solutions. Yeah. For the part of the financial inclusion, from the livelihood enhancement component, we have 43,000 saving groups with around 587,000 beneficiaries who have already saved around 3.3 million USD, and they have issued loans of around 1.3 million USD. And all these groups have been connected with the financial sectors, and they have started to receive loans and trainings on financial management. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Josephine. Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me point out that all of these sessions are actually being broadcast as live cast, and they will be available for replay. I know all day long it will be very difficult to absorb every single session, so we encourage you to go visit the Digital Public Library on YouTube for ID4Africa for any segment you want, so you can get all the information that you may have missed at the session. So thank you very much, Tanzania, for the progress that you have made in utilization of identity in social protection, which is a leading application. You have forfeited your time for Q&A, unfortunately. So I ask the audience to submit their questions to livecasts@id4africa.com, and we will make sure that we get your questions answered in the livecast forum. Thank you very much, DG. Thank you. Thank you, Josephine. Thank you. We are continuing the program now. There's a slight switch and slight change. I'll tell you about the switch. We are going to feature now South Africa because of the similarity of the topic that you've seen, and also the study that was made by the Tony Blair Institute. So I'd like to call to the stage Mr. Fani Sethok-Ga, who's the General Manager of Grants Operations, South African Social Security Agency, SASSA, South Africa. Mr. Fani Sethok-Ga. He will talk about digital identity and G2P efforts in the payment of social grants. Please welcome our guest. Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Do you have the control? Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. The perspective that I'm going to be sharing with yourselves is in relation to the usage of identification for access of services within the South African government. And for that purpose, as they prepare to give me the first slide on the board, just to indicate that in South Africa, if you don't have identification, 90% of the services will probably be impossible for you to be able to access. Meaning, we're talking from the perspective of voting to perspective of getting an ordinary driver's license, including getting other social benefits on the ground. With that, I want to request that I be given the first slide so that I can be able to take you through. I don't have it. The red one. Okay. Whilst we are waiting for the first slide to come through, I want to indicate that in 2020, when the pandemic hit the rest of the world, South Africa was not immune to the challenges that were brought about by the pandemic. And for that matter, the country was forced to look at alternative measures in which those people or those citizens that have been hit by the unfortunate events of the pandemic are to be able to be assisted. But of course, with that having been said, I'm having trouble here. Please. Yeah. Thanks a lot. So with that, the country was therefore forced to work out mechanisms which would enable the rest of the population to be assisted. But the context, in a nutshell, is that the South African Social Security Agency that renders grants administration services on behalf of government does it through one, clients being given a number of access channels on which to access their social assistance program. We have two groups of clientele, approximately 15 million, those that we access on a month-to-month. We're shaking hands with them on a month-to-month. And that group of clientele, they access our services through digital systems. The second element is with regards to how do we identify them when they access these services. Of course, we're using digital systems through integration that we have with the Ministry of Home Affairs, who is the custodian of identification. So we have APIs that have been built that allows us to be able to verify this particular applicant, even though we haven't seen him, even though we have not seen any documentation that has been passed through to us. Thirdly, once applications have been pushed through, the South African Social Assistance Program is subject to means test. In other words, it is not automatic that you would qualify for a social grant. You ought to be subjected to means test so that we are able to test if ever you've got any other forms of income that are possibly above the threshold, which may result in you not accessing the grant completely or possibly qualifying for some partial allocation. So for that, we conduct means test using other digital interfaces that we've built with the different banking industry and other stakeholders. But of course, once again, the key here is identity. Number is the mode of us to be able to do all of these things. The benefit transfer, once again, you will not be able to access your benefits provided you've got some form of identity that allows you to be able to have access to some form of store of value, either an account or possibly a cell phone number that is linked to identification. And that it's also part of the prerequisite by the Ministry of Finance, which have put it before us as a condition of allocation of funds that we are administering, that if you're going to be pushing money into cell phones, you need to guarantee government that you can link up that particular ID number to an identification of a particular person. So if I can be given the next slide. So in a nutshell, what we are saying is identity in the context of G2P program in South Africa is quite key, meaning if you don't have ID, unfortunately, we can't help. On the same note, in 2020, what exactly were we solving for? When the pandemic hit, what was brought before us was there is a large population of the citizens of the country that are not having access to basic necessities, that are unemployed, that are likely going to be affected more as a result of the pandemic. And for that purpose, we were requested to work out mechanisms on which we could explore in ensuring that this particular population, in the advent of the pandemic, can be assisted accordingly. If I can be given the next slide. Give me all the bullets. And for that, one of the basics information that we knew at the time was that 45% of the population of the country was basically the poorest 10% living with an average monthly income of approximately 352 rands. You will convert it in dollars. And that particular population, it was projected that the hunger in the country will be able to increase. It will move from 4.3% to 7%. Next. So, government was therefore forced to employ mechanisms that could be utilized to intervene in this particular instance. And what we had seen was in 2020, March, the president of the country announced a national lockdown. The Minister of Social Development pronounced the interventions that are supposed to be followed. At the same time, the regulations for the COVID-19 social relief of distress were promulgated. And at the end, we had a new grant that was launched, and the first applications were basically taken on the 15th of March. As I've indicated, the applications that came through were taken through digital means. Next. They were taken through digital means as depicted. I think I've already outlined. You can give me the next slide. But in a nutshell, the current status of G2P landscape in South Africa is as follows. We have two groups. The normal social grants, which is for the elder people, the disabled, the mothers of young children, but we have a special intervention which we call social relief of distress, which is triggered in the events of disasters. It can be rain, it can be fire, it can be small incidents where in a single household experiences unforeseen circumstance. But in 2020, COVID-19 SRD was actually introduced, which was an intervention that was provided in the form of cash. Give me the next slide. Which was provided in the form of cash to those that were identified to be in need at the time. And for that purpose, the stats as depicted is a summary of the different social grants as we are providing at the moment. In a nutshell, summarized as COVID-19, 8.1 million applications that are currently in payment versus approximately 15 million applications that came through. The normal social grants, 12 million applications that we are administering versus approximately an equivalent of 15 million. Now, the question that you should be asking is why such a huge drop between applications and payments? Once again, I said the model is based on the usage of identification as a means of identifying, verifying, authenticating, and taking decisions to the applicants. Next. This that you are seeing here is specifically a typical trends in growth in terms of applications for COVID-19 SRD applications that came through in 2020. Extensions were provided up to now. That program, government is talking introduction of basic income support, implying that there is an alternative to that particular program that will be coming through. Give me next. Of course, we couldn't have done this without strategic partners. And amongst key strategic partners that enabled us to do all of this, one is the Ministry of Home Affairs. We are one of the entities whose database is regarded as the most accurate, closest to being 100% accurate because of a mere fact that we shake hands with these applicants on a month-to-month basis, unlike with the rest of the other entities. Give me the next slide, please. Unlike with the rest of the other entities within the government cycles. But for us, the Department of Home Affairs is, as the custodian of identification, we have direct access through APIs to majority of the Department of Home Affairs databases which they are currently using. Whether it's databases which they've used in the past, which they are no longer actively utilizing, but they are being referenced for inquiry purposes, we have access to it. Whether it's new databases that they've just built, or they are currently building or unwrapping, we have access to it. So for that purpose, the Ministry of Home Affairs is key to the social protection program of South Africa. But of course, we have, I think, amongst key stakeholders that are worth mentioning here is the banks through the Banking Association. I must say that in 2020, when that program was introduced through the Banking Association, we requested the central bank through the Banking Association to convene all banks in the country, approximately 35 banks. And we said we want to have an engagement with the banks regarding the rails that we want to be established to enable us to be able to do some of the work that we would like to do. I can safely confirm today that we are one of the only few entities, and I'm repeating, we are one of the only few entities that are allowed to be able to access the bank accounts of all the 30 million people that you have seen displayed in there. Of course, other entities can do it, but we must first go to court, get a court order for you to be able to be authorized. But in our case, we do it on a monthly basis. We pass a record. We pass a file of approximately 15-16 million records to each of the banks. They throw it back to us with them having gone through the contents of each of the accounts and having verified whether there is income flows and for us to be able to take a decision. And the rest of the other stakeholders exactly the same. So the rest of the other stakeholders that are there, we do the same. Give me the next one, please. Of course, there have been challenges here and there. Amongst those challenges is identification and the need to ascertain validity of certain clients. I think one of our weaknesses in our social protection program is non-usage of biometric, of which we are working on it. I can confirm that by the end of this financial year, we would have put infrastructure in place because that work has commenced. Give me the next one. Give me the next one. The future we see through improved identification of clients. As I wrap up, give me the slide, please. In a nutshell, we're seeing improved relations between ourselves and the Ministry of Home Affairs because there is a lot of rails that we are building. Currently, we have just put it before the banks and said to them, we no longer want you to be sending us accounts provided each one of those bank accounts come with an embedded biometric on it, because that's the future that we are building, and we are hoping in the next 3-4 months that future will be here. So we're preparing the banking industry to be ready when we eventually launch in the next few months. We're saying biometrics used as another form of identification for potential clients. In my other cap, back in the country, I'm leading a project on re-engineering business processes for the South African Social Security Agency. And we have made biometric to be a key requirement for every process map, whether you call HR, whether you call it finance, whether you call facilities, biometrics is the way to go. Increased digitization efforts, public-private partnerships, relations expanded. Of course, like the rest of the speakers have said, you can't do this without private-public partners. So, and hence the topic, digital public infrastructure. Better collaboration with the banking industry and influence on the banking, on the onboarding processes and biometric onboarding of clients. I think this is actually one of the milestones within the South African landscape, because today, as I'm speaking, we are just concluding the technical rails, which Once they've been signed off, the banking industry will be rolling out, and boom, no more receiving of bank accounts from the banks provided there is biometrics embedded. For that purpose, I want to say, ladies and gentlemen, I really appreciate for the time that I've been given. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. There's a lot of insights here and a lot of lessons learned. I like the fact that you talk about improving the coordination between the Identity Authority and between the Social Granting Authority. I understand also the emphasis on identifying and strong identification through the use of biometrics, which is what you're doing. We appreciate the challenges that you are facing, and I'd like to ask the audience to submit their questions to livecast@id4africa.com, unless somebody has a burning question, very quick. Given the natural phenomena that's happening right now, I want to make sure we get through the sessions today without major electric issues or intervention from high above. So if somebody has a really burning question, otherwise I'd like to ask you to submit them to livecast@id4africa.com. Thank you very much once again. We had another slight situation. It's a government intervention from above, but not too high above. We were supposed to have the head of the Identity Authority from Sierra Leone, but he was called as he was heading to the airport for an emergency meeting. Therefore, we have two of his colleagues who are going to replace him in that presentation, but they promised me it will only be 10 minutes since they are not the ones who are supposed to give that presentation. So I'd like to call on Michaela McKay, who will be also participating in a panel tomorrow. She's the Director and Chief Operating Officer, Directorate of Science and Technology, Sierra Leone, and a board member of the Digital Public Goods Alliance, and Philip Bangura, who is the Deputy Director, Banking Supervision. They will tell us a little bit about financial inclusion and service delivery, also using identity. So please, the podium is yours. Thank you.
It's working. So you're using this one? Right?
Very good afternoon, everyone. Trust me, we'll be right on time. Okay. So just imagine a small village, maybe in Indonesia or Nigeria, and that's what Sierra Leone looks like, with a population of 7.5 million people from the recent midterm census resource. So basically the goal for Sierra Leone is to see how we can really have a functional, integrated, and a reliable citizen registration and vital statistics system on the one part, and ID management system on the other part, but for both citizens and non-citizens. The clicker that wants me to stay on. Okay. So basically, when we talk about the identity of service delivery in Sierra Leone, it's important that we look a little bit at the historicals, where we were in 2017, and the efforts that have been made by the National Civil Registration Authority to position themselves as the only entity that would be responsible for identity services for all the sectors, cutting across. It has engaged several stakeholders, both locally and internationally. So collaboration with the ministries, departments, and agencies has been critical to its successes and its service delivery. So it has made NIN, which is the National Identification Number, a mandatory resource for both public and the private sector, integrating with the International Tax Identification System, NACIT, NRA, and most importantly, the Sierra Leone Road Safety Authority as well. So you find as we continue to use these resources for service delivery, you can see an incremental surge in registration, and that is the reason why we have the numbers as we do today. So this slide really just kind of gives you a synopsis or snapshot of where we were in 2016 and where we are currently 2023, Q1, with 90% of the population being registered as opposed to 7% in 2016. So of the 90% that has been registered, you can see that we barely have 10% unregistered. We have even percentage of, not so much even, percentage of male and female, 51% female registered and 49% male 62% adults, that's 18 years and above, and 38% of children that has been registered. So interoperability is really critical for us in Sierra Leone, and the question as to how we have achieved this is important. Of course, laying emphasis on public awareness and sensitization. We've heard a bit of that throughout the presentations this morning, engaging in local language, local dialects of the people for purposes of understanding. But one thing that's important to mention, that the identification really is the basis for us to drive digital transformation in Sierra Leone as a whole. So we can see identity for data sharing is used to align our processes and procedures between and amongst ministries, departments, and agencies, and also the private sector. But what really has been the benefits? And we could see, for the most part, is to eliminate conflicts that have existed prior to the NCRA taking up these reforms. We now have guarantee credible data that is shared between and amongst institutions. And of course, it's a single source of truth. So if you want to know about identification, systems verification, we know it's a national civil registration that has that mandate to do so. The principle of data sharing and interoperability is self-explanatory. From the registration, we now move on to how we identify the records between and amongst MDAs. And of course, NCRA is mandated by law to provide legal identity, of course, with the consent of the beneficiaries themselves. So the NIN number, interestingly, although a lot of citizens do not even understand what the acronym means, but they actually do know that NIN is required for them as individuals to be identified by the economy. Otherwise, they can't be provided for within the economy and the ecosystem as a whole. So as mentioned earlier, 90% of Sierra Leoneans are registered from birth, of course, going forward. And we talk about the issuance of secure identification. It runs throughout the system, from issuance of secured printed birth certificates, marriage certificates, divorce certificates, and also there are security protocols that are introduced at different stages of implementation and also validation of identification. So the use cases are self-explanatory for individuals. They are used to prove their identity. For businesses, KYCs, between and amongst themselves, and also for government to business service delivery. Within the government, it helps them to plan for developmental interventions. It helps with resource mobilization, both locally and internationally. And clearly, you can't leave out the NGOs that are within the ecosystem, so they are also beneficiaries and users of the digital identification. So this just gives you a snapshot of the various services that are offered. Tax revenue, the NCRA is integrated with the NRA for payroll, banking system, health and insurance, the driver's license, as I mentioned earlier, and most importantly for education, for student registration within the education system. Now the NIN is used for purposes of identification. So at this point, I will hand over to my partner, Philip, to continue the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think I'll really go with the slides. I just try to do it fast. We don't have enough time. For us as a bank, we've struggled with how do we identify people that actually open account, the eKYC issues, and how do we improve financial inclusion. I've been with the central bank for 21 years, and part of what I've been doing is set up the Credit Reference Bureau, the Collateral Registry, and quite recently the Financial Consumer Protection. And all of that needs a unique identifier for us to be able to move forward. We tried the BVN that Nigeria did, but we couldn't get the money to actually do that, so we actually approached WAMI. Fortunately, they've approved for Sierra Leone, Liberia, Guinea, and so on. But prior to that, we were fortunate to have our NCRA having 90% of the population registered. So whilst we're waiting for that project to go through a procurement process, you know how long that will take, we've decided to tap into what NCRA have to offer. And what we've done is, as a central bank, we mediate the financial institutions and the NCRA to see how we can do e-verification. And we had an agreement, and part of what we've done so far is a pilot. We're piloting the model. We're using API and also a portal, because the reason why there are some institutions like bureaus and microfinance institutions that actually don't have the sophisticated system for API connectivity. So what we're actually doing is to see how it works and to be able to understand. And also part of what we've done is to ensure that we give timeline for people to go and give their NIN to their bank account, so that we link every bank account to NIN. in a bid to sanitize the banking system, to address the issue of money laundering and terrorist financing, as well as to improve access to finance, so that those in the provinces that do want access can have access. But prior to this engagement with the NCRA, we tried several other options. The first one is proof of ID. Come with a form to show that you pay utility bills. Unfortunately, most of the people who pay utility bills are not on their name. You move to a house, the meter is the landlord's name, and utility bills in the landlord's name. So it becomes difficult. So the landlord had to sign and say, yes, you live here, which is not authentic. We also try to see how do we get people in the villages to open accounts. So we tried the TR KYC, where the chief will just say, I know this individual, he stays in this village, and we're using that. But all of that had its own challenges and difficulties. But with the NIN, all of this problem will just disappear. So now that we have 90%, I believe the next time we'll be here, we will be able to tell you exactly how much progress we've made. And obviously, Nigeria will be a team that we'll talk to after this meeting to learn a lot from them and also to share what we've made, the progress we've made in the next 1 year. I think I'll stop here so far. Thank you.
Thank you. In fact, let me say, we did the livecast episode on February 8th called Eye on Sierra Leone. That's episode 37, which was a really detailed hour-and-a-half coverage. It tells an amazing story from going from zero to having a fully functional coverage of the population linked with all the services that are out there. So I salute and congratulate Sierra Leone for the swiftness by which they've managed to get their identity system up to speed, and it should give you an inspiration if you are lagging behind in terms of the development of your identity system. You can really catch up if you have the wrong strategic plan, if the right strategic plan. So please watch that episode. Okay, we're going to continue. We have another quick insight presentation which will focus on another topic, which is the use of identity in health. And I'm pleased to have with me here today Dr. Lydia Selby, who used to be the former CEO of the National Health Insurance Authority, Ghana. I'd like to invite her to the stage, who will talk about the Ghana Health App. Dr. Selby, welcome. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Please.
Are they moving it forward for me?
You can ask. Operator, please advance the slide for...
Thank you very much. I'm very honored and privileged to be here today to be speaking on a topic that is close to my heart, universal health coverage. And I actually came out of retirement for this, so it shows how much it means to me. Next slide. Just to give some of Ghana's demographics. We are estimated population of 32 million. Our poverty head count using $1.90 is around 11%. And the other couple of things of interest are out-of-pocket payments for health are currently at 36%, when it should be less than 20%. And our external support for health is now down to 12%. Because of the introduction of the National Health Insurance. And we need to leverage on this and move it faster. Next. Now, the general overview of the NHIS. We have a legislation that set it up, and this year is actually 20 years since the law was passed. And approximately 54% of the population are actually covered. And this has stagnated. And our research shows it isn't so much the financial barrier, but some of the complexities of taking biometric information. And the financing is due to a health levy, which is actually quite a progressive tax, the way we've done it. Formal sector employment deductions, and then premiums for the informal sector. but we have pretty generous exemption policies. So we realize that it isn't the finance that is giving us difficulties with getting everybody enrolled. Next, now looking at the broad issues of universal health coverage, the right to health is a universal human right. And we all know that social insurance, for it to work, it must be mandatory. And even though the law says we should enforce and punish, you cannot punish someone for not complying with the social good. So it's about finding another way to get our people on board. The challenges we're facing was in identity. People who are not enrolled using people's NHIS card. Even though it had biometric, it wasn't a secure, bona fide database. And therefore, we needed to find another way. And then government is not able to effectively collect revenue because it's the sick who are on the health insurance. And for subsidization, the healthy need to be on as well. And as I say, you cannot mandatorily enforce something that is for a social good. So we were looking for a solution using technology. And we came up with this My NHIS app. And what we needed it to do was to work on all platforms, provide service to users without complexity so that everybody can use it. The infrastructure sits on a complicated back end, which must work seamlessly with different databases, our own claims database, health facilities, as well as the NIA, but still protect the sanctity of the National Identification Authority's database. So, next. So, how did we tackle these various issues? First of all, accessibility. No traveling to our enrollment centers. You can do it from the comfort of your home. No additional cost to citizens. Accessible everywhere with mobile technology. And even foreign phone numbers are now allowed so that somebody in the UK or the US can register a relative in a village in Ghana as long as they have an ID card. And you can do individual or group. And the important point is now we have a trusted identity because the National Identification Authority did a thorough job before giving people their national ID cards. Next. And please, there are a couple more. Perfect. Thank you. So, this is now a one-stop shop. Smartphones, Androids, iPhones, and you can register yourself because your Ghana card has captured the necessary biometric IDs. You can renew your own registration. You pay by mobile money, debit card, bank transfer, whichever way you want to do it. And it gives you a digital ID on your mobile phone that you can use to access service at the provider site. Now, for the bigger providers, they may double check using fingerprints. But for the very small rural clinics, what they use is USSD technology. Once that verifies the number with our database, we send an SMS automatically from the system to the owner of that Ghana card to ensure that the right person is actually accessing service. Next. And looking at some of the augmented services that this now gives us, it means you can search for a health facility location. We have the credentialed ones who are bona fide and entitled to work with the NHIS in the system. You can look up the medicines list of the NHIS so that nobody can tell you that you should pay out of pocket for a medicine that is paid for. We have highlights of the benefit package. You can now contact us directly. And to emphasize again, international usage, group, and individual. And what are the results so far? In just 5 months, we've realized that 75% of those using it is for new registrations. And as you can imagine, if you're self-employed, you do not want to go to an enrollment center and queue for an NHIS card. You've lost your day's wages. So what we've realized, civil servants and the self-employed are really using this application. Our membership had stagnated. Once we set up the health insurance, we got to about 40% of population coverage, stagnated. We brought USSD technology in for renewals. We quickly jumped up. Again, it stagnated. This, we think, is the big game changer we need to cover the whole country. What are some of the benefits? It's to make sure only eligible people access service. We hope it will allow us to really assess and control health costs. And people now have a chance to take control of their own health through the app. But the government should use this as an opportunity to plan the development of the health sector very well. Next. Now, I love this picture. It's on a very rural area in Ghana. The woman on the motorbike had a baby on her back, and she wanted to go and get health insurance at the center. And 2 people stopped her and said, listen, there's now technology on the mobile phone. Let's show you how to do it. We assume that the rural areas don't have digital literacy. I think they do. So last is lessons for Africa. We need to talk, I think all the previous speakers have talked about data privacy and security. If you're putting something on top of your national identification database, you must make sure you don't tamper with it so that things move only in one direction and not backwards to give the security of your database. But with health, you've got to worry about the patient's privacy as well. When data, health status and data leaks, in our environment, it can lead to stigmatization and discrimination. So all this must be kept in mind as you design whatever app you're using. You must make sure you have good network coverage. In Ghana, everybody has a mobile phone. In the rural areas, you see phones hanging on trees. People leave them there, go and farm, come back and check their messages when they come back. The digital literacy gaps, I think we shouldn't assume that some people can't use these applications. When we started, it was the people in Accra who were not using it, who we thought were the literal. The people in the village don't have transport moving up and down. It is inconvenient to leave your farm and go and queue. The minute we gave them something on a mobile phone, they made sure they used it. And then the communication strategy, I think it's been talked about a lot by all other countries. Talk to them in their local language and make sure they understand. Unfortunately, political partisanship, misinformation is rife in our countries. This is a social good. You need to bypass all of that and let the people of your countries understand the value of the national ID and the extra benefits that can come. I think digital ID is a key to achieving UHC in sub-Saharan Africa. Thank you.
Dr. Selby, thank you for this beautiful presentation. I love the image that in Ghana, mobile phones grow on trees. So that might be the way for inclusion in Africa. Let's find that tree where mobile phones grow. Let's harvest it. I actually think the Ghana card story is a beautiful one. I'll tell you why. It's a beautiful one because it shows that the electronic identity is not the end. It is the doorway towards mobile identity and towards digital identity. It solves the problem of privacy because you're not checking against a centralized database. You are trusting the source, which is issued by the identity authority, and therefore any derived identity can be used by health, by social protection, by even the private sector. So we thank Ghana today for a detailed exposition of their success. Thank you, Doctor. Thank you. Okay, you have been very, very patient with me, and I apologize for the length of the day, but we'll promise you we're going to end sooner than the program because of the circumstances and the fact that it's a long day. However, I have kept the last, which is not the least. I've kept something really important because it is the future, and we have to start paying attention to it today in Africa. And this is the topic of federation, decentralized identity, and interoperability of trust. And I'm pleased that there are two people who are thought leaders themselves, but who represent significant institutions, who are going to give us some luminary keynote presentations. So I'll ask the first speaker to come to the stage, and that's Gail Hodges, who's the Executive Director of Open ID Foundation. You've seen their logo already on some of the slides, for example, Morocco. And she's going to talk about, from federation to decentralization, the approach to digital identity in the United States. Gail? Thank you. Thank you for being with us.
Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Gail Hodges, the Executive Director of the Open ID Foundation. And first, I'd like to warmly thank many of you, as Joseph mentioned, who have chosen to use Open ID Foundation standards. Some of you might not even fully realize that, but I'm going to thank you anyway, and we'll come on to a little bit of a confession as well. This is my first time standing on the stage in Africa talking about identity. And from a quick survey of some of my peers at the Open ID Foundation, we think it's quite possible it's the first time since we were founded in 2007. So I say this as a confession, but also as a recognition that what we sometimes call the global north and the global south are perhaps not as connected as they can and should be. So I'm honored to be here today to learn from all of you. And our goal is to be of service to the governments here in Africa, but also to our peer nonprofits and the multilateral organizations that are helping you deliver on the potential of digital identity. So as a nonprofit global standards body, our vision is to help people assert their identity wherever they choose and to lead the global community in creating identity standards that are secure, interoperable, and privacy preserving. This is not new to us. We serve today billions of people around the world using a standard that some of you have used, maybe without even realizing it. If you've ever signed in with Apple, signed in with Microsoft, or with Google for your personal everyday use, or for your enterprise applications, if you've ever signed in or used the Microsoft Azure platform, you're using our standards. They're behind the scenes. We are also serving many people through the government partners that you can see on the bottom left-hand side. So NIST is a long-standing partner of ours in the US, and we regularly brief the White House and the Treasury Department on standards-related matters, as well as the country of Japan. And we're also pleased to have entered into a liaison with the EU to assist them with their use of our standards in the European Digital Identity Wallet. We also support many of the countries you see on the bottom row with open banking and open data deployments, and the Data Free Flows with Trust initiative that's cascading around many countries in the world. We have hundreds of members, many of whom are individuals, just individuals, as well as very large corporates, including digital platforms and identity providers. And I'm also particularly proud that you might not be able to read the icon of Chicago Advisory Partners, but they actually represent the Central Bank of Brazil. And it's great to see that we are continuing to be very relevant to our community and delivering on digital identity capabilities. Today I wanted to spend more time diving into our digital identity standards and some of the research that we've been doing. So next week, the Open ID Foundation and our peer nonprofits will publish the first draft of a paper on human-centric digital identity for government. As part of this ambitious effort, we tried to analyze the current global landscape. So the way that we kind of broke it down was on the top of the page, we recognize that in many countries, there's complete public governance of the digital identity ecosystem. And in some jurisdictions, it's driven more by the private sector. Then on the left-hand side, you can see that there are many countries that choose to have complete centralization of their identity infrastructure, both the issuance and the verification. And on the right-hand side, you can see that there are some countries which are leaning towards decentralization, at least decentralizing from the government playing a role in verification. So some of you might say, Gail, I'm not very happy with where my flag is on the page, or Gail, where is my flag? It's not showing there. I modestly share with you that the first draft of this paper will come out next week on our website, and I'll show you our website link later. And we warmly welcome your feedback in order to improve the contents and the assessment of the paper, as well as its recommendations. So what I'm going to do today is focus a little bit more on the top right-hand corner. You'll actually see there's two American flags. One is actually for access to paying your taxes and federal services. But on the right-hand side, on the right-hand side is also, will it help if I click the button? There you go. You were missing the important slide. I could see it here on mine. I got to do 2 clicks. It's very quick. So apologies. So north-hand side, public governance. South side is private governance, left side completely centralized, and the right side was decentralized, so at least decentralized from the government. And then I'm going to focus the next part of the conversation, as Joseph said, on the US implementation of digital wallets. What you're seeing or might have heard of Apple ID and Wallet and Google Wallet, which is rolling out across several US states already. And we're also going to get into what that means for being able to federate that, or a decentralized model across the US. So all of you are very familiar with digital identity benefits and what the benefits are for the government, for the users, and for the relying parties. In the US model, there's been a bit more of a focus on equity. That's the popular word in DC. But the equity for participation in the formal economy. I think you have that probably here in Africa. It's certainly an issue in the US as well. There's also a concern around time. So even the wealthiest of individuals struggle to be able to assert their identity effectively in person and online. And there's also a material and growing concern around cybersecurity, cybercrime, and actually, from a US perspective, the national security posture of the country with respect to cybercrime and that money being siphoned off and funding criminal networks and, in some cases, nation-state actors as well. So a lot of material concerned about building up the best infrastructure. And also a recognition that if we can't solve these challenges for even the online environment, how are we going to be able to address them more fully when it comes to blockchain, the metaverse, cryptocurrencies, AI, and IoT? So how is this working in the US? So many of you know that the very few Americans, about 42%, have a passport, and there is no national ID program. So the individual states or jurisdictions are responsible for issuing the identity credential. One of the key enablers in the US, however, is that over the last 9 years, the big digital platforms, Google Wallet, Apple Wallet, Samsung Wallet, have sought to simplify onboarding and enabling everything you have in your physical wallet today. So whether that's the boarding passes for planes, digital payments, digital transit, loyalty, or even digital versions of university cards, they're all moving into these digital wallets. But identity hadn't really happened, so there was a kind of multi-year gap for the US states were trying to solve for identity in partnership with the digital platforms. But the key question was how to set up a model that was secure, privacy-preserving, and scalable in the US, and that could be interoperable across borders. So the big issue was government sitting in the middle of a transaction. So if you're familiar with a Google Pay or an Apple Pay payment model, just like Visa or MasterCard transactions, every transaction goes through the intermediary, through the bank and the acquiring network. And so there was a desire for identity transactions, not to have the government stand in the middle. That was a material issue for privacy. So how to move away from that? How to allow the user and the relying party to communicate directly? So the answer, quote unquote, from the US perspective was to incorporate the wallet in the center. So the government would still play its role, providing the relationship with the user to provision the credential, that digital credential to the wallet, but then the wallet has the relationship with the relying party, and it's helping that user to present the transaction on a day-to-day basis. You'll see there's no line between the government and the relying party. So that's a key step forward. However, this model does introduce new challenges. The first is the use of open standards for presentation puts the burden on the user to take control over which data they're willing to present to each of the relying parties. So that's what we see today on the internet. It's up to the relying party to ask for what they need, and the user provides that data. But that leads to all the problems that we have on the internet today. So this model does continue an existing challenge that we're facing. The second challenge is that although it may decentralize the transaction away from the government, it actually re-centralizes with the wallet. And that could be a wallet that is provided by the government, or it could be a wallet that's provided by a private entity, or it could be both. Or in fact, multiple wallets could be enabled by the government. So these are just a few of the examples of real concerns that the community is actively working on today to try and solve. But first, let's take a look at what it's like to provision. So how to set it up. So it's easy for a user to set up the credential, the user scanning that physical ID. So even though it doesn't have a chip on it, you can still scan the front and back of the card. Here in Africa, if you did have a chip-based ID, that would be an even more high assurance step. And then, of course, you can do a liveness check to make sure it's a real individual, try and avoid the deep fakes, and do the selfie using the camera on the front of the phone. So clearly there are dependencies on having a smartphone and having a smartphone with certain core capabilities on it. Once you've gathered that information, it's with the government to do the back-end check. You need to have a system of record to be able to check that information against, including the biometrics. And then the government has to make a judgment. Am I comfortable that I have the information I need to provision this credential into this wallet, into this device that the user is holding? Or do I need a bit more information? Do I need to ask them to upload or go through additional steps before I can provide that assurance and give them the thumbs up to provision? Or do I need them to actually come into a physical location? Because I really need to have that last sense of confidence. Once the government's made their call, then the credential can be bound to the device, stored on the device, and the government has the control of maintaining it. So this is the core government process. The government has full sovereignty over every step of this journey that they're comfortable and confident they're provisioning. Then we get on to the part where the government is not directly involved. This is for the presentation. So there are both in-person presentation and online presentation. So for in-person, the standards are more mature. There's the option of initiating the transaction with a QR code or with NFC. In either way, you're creating a digital bond, you're creating a handshake between the user's device and a terminal on the other side, or it could be mobile device to mobile device, in order to create a secure channel through which that digital ID can then be sent. So at that point, it looks very straightforward. The user sees the information that's desired from the relying party. They make a decision as to whether they want to send that data across, and the relying party is going to confirm. The user would also receive a receipt of that transaction on their device, and they have the option to receive that receipt, but not the obligation to have it. That data could also be, prepared in a meta way, like I only want to assert that I'm over 21, for example, or I only want to provide the KYC data needed to open a bank account. So those are choices that are available. So now let's move on to here we go, the more complicated online presentation. And you'll see it says draft standards up there, and that's because the ISO IEC 18013-7 standards are still in draft. But this is the basic concept of what one would seek to do. So whether you're in your own device trying to do an app-to-app transaction, so between your wallet and, let's say, a bank account app, or whether you want to use your device on a browser and have within your phone, go to a browser application on your app or to a separate device that is in your possession. In either of those ways, you want to be able to have a mechanism to create a secure channel between your wallet holding the credential and that other online channel. And so once you have that secure channel, then you go through the same dance of the data that it's requested from the relying party, the user makes the choice, and they present it with the receipt. This is also where the OpenID Foundation standards come in, because we're working on that left side of the page, one of the channels for how you could present the credential. Sorry, I keep forgetting to click the right buttons for you all. So that's the end of the transaction is the same, and as before, there's no government in the middle of the verification. Got a clicker problem.
Maybe you can ask the operator to advance.
I just got to go back now. All right, we got it. Thank you. A little sticky. Okay, so some of you who are familiar with the EU digital identity wallet infrastructure, this is their architectural map with one addition that I'll share. So we're very proud that the European Commission has selected our standards. What you'll see is OpenID for verifiable credential issuance and OpenID for verifiable presentation and SIOP v2. Those are some of the standards to be able to issue the credential and then to be able to present the credential. And then there are other standards from ISO and from the W3C that are working on the storage and the data format of that information. There's also the ISO IEC 18013-5 standard, which allows for the proximity transaction. So we're more focused on the remote domain. I mentioned before about the digital wallets, Apple and Google and so forth. So you'll see that there's an addition I made of putting in a dotted box around the arrow where proprietary APIs can play a role as well. And that's partly because the ISO standards are not yet mature for that piece. And so governments like in the US have to integrate directly with the proprietary APIs of those partners. So in terms of use cases and what we're seeing kind of roll out first, what we have in the short term is airline travel is the champion use case. And full disclosure, I used to work at Apple and worked on the relationship with TSA and the Department of Homeland Security to bring this part to life. But in the short term, it's to allow that user who is a traveler to have a digital version of their identity credential they can present to the Transportation Services Administration, to be able to get through that airport security checkpoint. And then the second most likely use case that we're going to probably see coming out this year is for age-restricted purchases, so for alcohol or tobacco, convenience stores, and so forth. In the medium term, we're also likely to see the KYC use case, the enterprise authentication use case, law enforcement, such as for the roadside stop with police, and employment. So what you see is those 6 with a star are actually all use cases which the US federal standards body, NIST, has got reference applications that they're working on. And the 4 in the middle have a dependency on remote capabilities, and we're working with NIST on those 4 items. And then there are some other use cases likely to come along, such as social media in the middle, as well as the end-to-end travel use case. And then, of course, there's many more use cases we would expect to come, particularly in the online presentation mode, where it's going to be more quick for people to be able to accept relative to the physical domain, where you need to have the physical terminal capabilities ramped up. So the federation question. So I mentioned 69 different jurisdictions in the US. How are they actually all going to be connected together? So there's a couple of mechanisms. One is obviously following standards. So the actual standards of what you're issuing to, the data formats, and so forth are using those international standards that I mentioned. But another key capability is coming from the checks and balances that 2 organizations are providing. So one is the DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, for that travel use case. They're asking all of the states to perform a self-assessment, to go through their end-to-end model to make sure that they have followed a very rigorous process and they're conformant with standards, and that they have all the kind of key management, like the PKI infrastructure we heard is so important, that all of that is implemented effectively. The other component is AMVA, which is the Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators, which is all of the different jurisdictions' heads of driving license departments that also are responsible for identity. They each will be able to provide their public key for issuance into a commonly held digital trust service. And that's really important because that means that all of the relying parties only have one place that they need to go to in the US to get all of the private keys from all of those issuing authorities. So not a strange problem to have a public key registry, but at least in the US that's going to have government governance against it. All right, so all of the digital benefits, again, we're all quite familiar with them. The question I like to ask to government officials, and welcome your thoughts on offline later, is how can we achieve the scale benefits and not achieve them in 20 years, but how do we do that in 5 years? So many of your countries are rapidly on that path already, and we've seen many of the rapid growth cycles that you're able to accomplish. But as a global community, how can we all collectively move down that path? So this is something I'm particularly keen to see us achieve. And once you have individual domestic implementations, regardless of where you might put yourself on the map, whether you're more centralized or you're leaning towards a decentralized model, whether you're the global north or the global south, whether you have private sector implementations or public sector driven implementations, anywhere you are on the map, how are we collectively as a community going to interoperate? Because our people and our businesses inherently cross borders. And so how does that accomplish? We need to be able to have trust between countries. We need to have interoperability. We need to have the tools and the rules to be able to accomplish that. And so I'll share with you, there's some joint publications. From the top one is from 7 different nonprofits have participated in creating the joint government-issued digital identity credentials in the privacy landscape paper. That's already live and on openid.net, and others will be coming next week. Sorry? Already behind. So openid.net to get the privacy white paper, and then I'll come on to my takeaways. The last part is that decentralized models are gaining some momentum, and they're offering some opportunity, which I think Joseph mentioned earlier, really intriguing new way to think about the government being outside of the verification process, but it also does pose challenges we want to continue to work on. The OpenID Foundation standards, can help many of the deployments in those different quadrants we talked about earlier, and we really would like to continue to help you with your implementations and to help with global interoperability. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you, Gail, very much. Again, you will submit any questions for Gail on the livecast at ID4Africa.com, and really appreciate the insights, and this is a direction that is likely to dominate our future AGMs, I believe, as African countries begin to realize the importance of interoperability of trust. And speaking of that, thank you very much. And speaking of that, our last but not least presentation will be on the European version, European vision, European framework, European digital identity wallet for enabling the identity ecosystem for interoperability of trust. And for that, I'd like to welcome to the stage Didier Trut, who is the chairman of the Secure Identity Alliance. Didier?
How are you?
Très bien.
I'm the last one. I'm the last speaker.
Yes.
So glad to be with you this evening. I'm intervening tonight as the chairman of SIA. I don't know if you are familiar with SIA. It's an association that was founded almost 10 years ago. Almost. We will celebrate 10 years anniversary this year. It's a non-profit global association with different members. I will present them later on. And we are glad that Joseph invited us to present today the path that Europe is following and the path in which, let's say, SIA is participating with all the members, and many members are, I think, here tonight. So thanks, Joseph. SIA, as I said, is actively participating in the development of digital identity, and it will be interesting to share our progress, but also, let's say, the difficulties we face the past few years, and how do we learn from these difficulties to try to set the next 5-10 years of development on digital life. Presentation on SIA. Of course, today everything is going digital. It was very interesting to see this morning the pace in which digital is going when you compare year after year the progress made by the different states. And our vision today is based on the observation that identity affects all the sectors of activity. In the physical, as well as in the digital world, barriers are decreasing very, 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 very fast. From transportation to the banking world, via health and citizenship, from professional sphere or personal ecosystem, the application link to identity data and are multiplying at infinitum. In a sense, I would say that identity is a daily interoperability by itself. Secure Identity Alliance is a global non-profit association representing public and private sectors, actors, organizations active across the secure digital identity ecosystem. So we have created a legal platform. One, to enable industry, governments, and academia to have a meaningful dialogue and share best practices without entering into competitive business. And two, a college for the development of open standards. SIA has also successfully qualified in September 2022 under the recommendation for the specialist of ETU-TA5, International Telecom Union and UN Agency. And finally, and it was great we could do the speech today, we have the great privilege to make you a special announcement today. Currently, SIA and UNDP are finalizing a partnership agreement to demonstrate the importance of utility of the adoption of open standards. One upcoming planned activity is to integrate two UNDP's system building blocks already implemented in some of the UN member states, functional ID system with X-Road using OSIA standards. Perspective of SIA on digital ID is not new. Having produced unique reports back in 2013, they are all available and can be downloaded to the SIA website. We also co-author papers recently with OpenID Foundation and GAIN. At SIA Foundations in 2013, we already published our vision for digital ID, anticipating a new paradigm for identity. From a legal identity to many digital identities in private, public, and professional life. From an identification usage for the state to the use of rights and attributes verifying for the users. From national ecosystems to regional and international ecosystems. This new paradigm for identity is today materializing through a major technology uptake, the wallet. Is the wallet a technology uptake? We feel for a really successful uptake, a new technology, there has to be shift in convenience. For example, contactless payment is a real shift of convenience and shift of circumstances that necessitates the change. Shift in the circumstances, mobility and digitalization have taken the world. COVID has accelerated and extended use cases. And as a consequence, the need for digital accountability has never been so high. A shift in convenience, the wallet is the biggest of personal agency change since the browser. Driven by usage, experience, the wallet is designed as user-centric. I like this. I like the presentation that was before, where we see our government will not interfere in some of the transactions. What I like in this approach of the wallet and the user-centric wallet is the benefits to the citizen, the benefits to the user. I mean, it's centered to him. It's for his benefit. Up to him to choose the elements he wants to share, the elements he wants to communicate with, and all the information are centered to him. Is a shift in, and what about government responsibility? Governments are camping around the world, have understood what is at stake, and are driving wallet initiatives at national and regional level. Example, Europe Digital ID for mobile driving license, automobile driving license by AMV in the US. Governments are campaigning increasing responsibility in structuring a trust and control, the level of exigency, legal liability, and interoperability. Here we are talking about citizen data and sovereignty. The European vision, following the assessment of EDAS-1, for the one that are knows, follow this development in June 2021, the Commission proposed a framework for European digital identity that could be available for Europe citizens, residents, and business via European digital identity wallet. The proposed new framework, amended in 2014 regulation on electronic identification and trust services for electronic transaction in an internal market, EDAS regulation. So the digital Europe wallets, based on the vision and to fill the identity gaps, the European Commission announced in June 2021 the introduction of a wallet with an ambition that by 2030, so 6-7 years from now, 80% of the European population will have a wallet in Europe. The European vision is citizen-centric and put the user at the heart of the digital transformation with a wallet which is secure in respecting data privacy, offers citizens a powerful digital identity tool and the convenience to use it across border and in many use cases. The Europe digital wallets provide a secure and privacy-oriented identification and authentication mechanism to access public and private service online. And the UDI wallet enables the user to obtain, store, and present a digital document like mobility driving license, for example, to prove, and I like this, their rights to drive. So we are no more on just the digital identity or the identity, but the right you have by, of course, using your identity and proving that you are owner of, you're qualified with your driving license, and so you are qualified to drive. And you can extend this example to many other fields. The Europe digital ID wallets provide a secure and privacy-oriented identification and authentication mechanism to access public and private service online. The UDI wallet enables the user to obtain, store, present digital documents like the driving license to prove his/her own ability and rights to drive. Three principles are behind this Europe Digital Initiative. First pillar, and I heard that many times today, is inclusivity. It is for all, not just for some few. I mean, this system has to be designed such that everyone will be able to, let's say, benefit of it. It is a cross-border and cross-segment. It can be used to prove your identity or share your attestation with public and private third parties anywhere in Europe. And finally, it is privacy by design. It puts users in full control of what they share and what they will share with it. How to reach this ambition with 27 member states and 450 million inhabitants? By creating a trust framework interoperable by design. And the proposal requires member states to issue a digital wallet under a notified EID scheme built on a common technical standards following compulsory certification for high level of assurance. To set up the necessary technical architecture, speed up the implementation of the revised regulation, provide guidelines to member states, and avoid fragmentation, the proposal was accompanied by a recommendation for the development of a union toolbox defining the digital identity framework with technical specification of the wallet. So the mandates, or the new mandates from Europe to member states, is the introduction of this Europe digital ID wallet, bring new, of course, mandates to Europe members. One, they must ensure that each state will issue a wallet in their country. It's their responsibility. And, and as such, they must notify at least one wallet based on a very high level of identity. Two, they must enable verification of minimal ID attributes through sources. It is worth noting that all European wallets, public or private, must be notified to the European Commission. And Europe states must also ensure acceptance of the issued wallets by both public and private sector. When it comes to implementation, the European Commission has defined some rules to bring more flexibility and fasten the implementation. Instead of using Europe directives, the Commission leaves states implementation based on a toolbox of technical specification and implementation defined by the Commissions after consultation, and the security certification to speed up the process. The way the Commission animates this project is based on an innovative co-elaboration process. First, each stakeholder has a clear perimeter of responsibilities. The Commission, the Member States, and even the industry has been asked to propose a reference design to be reused. Secondly, because it's very agile, the legislation is progressing in parallel with the selection and delivery of supporting technology. Use cases are defined in parallel of the supporting technology. So the milestone that you have on the slide, that was the initial milestone set for the project, but since the experimentation, let's say, the solution will be defined by the end of the year, and the experimentation will last the next 2 years till mid-2025, before they start to roll out the full pilots, okay, in 4 segments, in 4 scale projects. And this pilot project is 4 scale pilots designed and led by a public-private consortium, each one piloting specific use case: electronic government services, educational credentials, payments, okay, etc. And for example, the potential consumption who many SIA members are involved gather 56 public and 80 private entities from 20 member states. So quite large. Takes some time to have everyone to converge, but it's started, well started. We participate in one consumption. I can tell you that it's moving ahead. So the new ecosystem is fundamental because it will create a new, let's say, scheme, drive for public and private stakeholders. Digital identity will not rely any longer on identity providers facing services providers. I'm sure you're familiar with this in this room, okay? It's many years that we are hearing, but who are the usage, who are the services, who are the provider of identity? I think what the project in Europe is trying to avoid, again, is to be centric to users and then have a toolbox managed in parallel with the legislation and agreed for things to move ahead. Nevertheless, the European project does not aim to a uniform single wallet for all Europeans. This is quite important. All member states have different requirements and specific needs based upon the maturity of their ecosystems, their own regulatory and legal environments, their own digital culture. It's the reason why the Europe ID project opens the way to different technology implementations. Philosophy is a powerful way for the member states and inhabitants to appropriate the wallets and to speed up the implementation. For this reason, we at SIA believe that the European ID framework is a major game changer, but not only for Europe. It may be also a major opportunity for every country's or regional organization to speed up the development of a digital identity. This assertion may be true for the African continent. First, because Africa is moving very fast to digital, very, very fast. Secondly, because federation of identities and interoperability are inevitable, particularly for economic reasons and because of usage of population, which for personal matters or business are already in cross-borders way of living. And finally, because African countries have led many initiatives to federate their efforts to develop the digital economy. Building a regional interoperability in Africa, why Africa can make it very fast? Because many African countries today have already key building blocks to support digital trust. We saw it in some of the presentation. We include state PKI to manage cybersecurity of digital identities. Electronic identity cards are deployed in many countries. And more precisely, African regional organizations could leverage on the Europe ID initiative. I say could or may. Let me develop these specific points. European Union and African regional organizations are composed of member states that are very attached to their sovereignty, with population deeply rooted in and attached to their identity. It took almost 10 years in Europe to reach the capacity and comprehension on how to create such a trust framework for digital identity. And Europe has had to take time to understand what was not a success and what did not work. IDAS V1, the one that are familiar, but was introduced in 2014, was the first step. But with mitigated results. Europe took the time to understand why and how could improve it, and with IDAS V2, reach an ambition of the digital identity for every inhabitant in Europe. And Europe has created this digital principle that are also very, we believe, valuable globally. The hard work to bring common states of the art understanding of the cybersecurity needs to reach a high level of security assurance, along with convenience of a mobile phone, can be reused largely outside of Europe and will lead the international standard. At the moment when African countries express their interest and will for the digital identities, leverage the European experience can be a way to boost the implementation and gain much time to sustain the development. The temptation to develop its own model may be strong, of course, but on the contrary, leapfrog successes and failures of others may be also very satisfying. SIA can help, and is already helping, thanks to the African members involved with us in the development of interoperability system, of identity system. SIA expertise, vision, and reach the importance of enabling ID system, but utilize open standards to both achieve improved efficiencies and functionality, and ensure that ID system can be evolved and adapt to aggregate changes. Over time, OSIA provide, yes, very good. As IDAS 2.0, National Identification System represents roots of trust from which PID can be derived and issued digital ID wallets. While today there is no selected standard for the PID issuance protocol, OSIA standard can help the PID provider to tap into relevant databases and systems to collect the PID and proceed with the insurance. As a conclusion, maybe personal one, personal comments, the choice of the digital identity system is also a choice of values, especially or particularly for personal data. Europe choice was driven by data privacy. Europe design an ID system done that way. If African countries and organizations are willing the same choice, the Europe initiatives sound really attractive, as based on GDPR, the most protective data policy in the world. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this insightful presentation.
1 minute.
It's okay. For this insightful presentation and for showing us a path forward, which is the result of many, many countries coming together and working. So I thank you very much for that. I will take just 1 minute to close the day. As you have seen today, enrollment is not enough. So in the past, we used to say we need to be enrolling more and more people. The challenges are enrollment. How do we reach the campaigns? Where do we go? Enrollment is not enough. That's yesterday's problem. Momentum in public engagement will die if we do not enable the correct interoperable identity verification in support of identity use. That's why we have emphasized identity verification today. You've heard for the first time, recurring again and again, wallets, digital wallets. You need to build that into your future. Interoperability of trust, PKI, decentralized identity options that need to be available, mobile identity, giving individuals ownership and control of their identity. That's part of the game now. The rate of change that is happening is only accelerating as digitalization moves full steam ahead. Not catching the wave will have serious opportunity costs. Your economic future rests on your ability to put digital identity in the hands of every citizen. This is not an option. This is not an idea. This is not a dream. This is a reality. It's today's reality. You had a long day today. I had a long day with you. I hope in some way you've gotten a flavor of the road ahead, what it looks like. Things are not getting simpler. Things are getting more rich, more complex, more powerful, more urgent. So more than ever, we need to work together to make sure that no country is left behind. And that's why your movement, ID4Africa, is here working with you through the livecast channel, through the AGMs, through the Ambassadors Bureau, to ensure that we get you what you need to do to accelerate your adoption of digital identity and digital transformation. You, as the delegates of your country, have a major responsibility to make sure that this trusted knowledge is contributing to building strategic capacity in your countries. The future is here today, and it weighs heavy on our shoulders. We have to act because our children need to know that we have acted responsibly, we have delivered enablers, respectful of their rights, respectful of their data and their ownership and control of their identity. This is not about politics. This is not about deciding how to assist a party to win an election. This is about creating change in a society where everybody has equal opportunity for access and everybody has a brighter future. So please utilize the digital public goods on the YouTube channel to review many of the sessions that you've heard about today. And please do submit your questions to the livecasts at id4africa.com so we can engage with you through the channel. And please recognize that we need to start augmenting. We can't just rely on the physical medium. The world is digitalizing, therefore knowledge should also have this hybrid capability. So thank you for a day that's very, very long and very intense. Tomorrow we have some more exciting things for you, of course, and our journey together continues. I'm humbled to be in front of you all day and to learn from all of you, from all the speakers, and to be enriched by your intensity. So we have a special treat for you now. We're ending earlier so you can go and network with each other and go and visit the networking zone where, as we said, in the networking zone or in the zone, conversations seed collaborations. Thank you very much.
Africa arise, Africa arise, Africa arise, oh mama.